There we go. All right. All right, everybody. I don't know if Brad's going to join us today. He was traveling. And I know he was stopping on the way back to Miami, so he may join or he may not, but we had always planned that he wasn't. So let's wish him a good time, whatever he's doing. But I have the star guest today. Sean is in the house at the beginning. A little under the weather, I've heard, flu-wise, but going to talk us through a whole bunch of cool things related to proof of work, mining, all the old world crypto stuff. So it should be entertaining. So welcome, Sean.
Hey, Joe. How you doing, man?
Surviving, buddy. Surviving, man. Barely.
Yeah, it's like myself. So I've got my Do Kwon picture on today. I think the year belongs to Do Kwon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he definitely pulled one out of the hat in the end too. With thanks to all the SBF fiascos and Alameda stuff. I mean, it kind of moved him off the front page, which I'm sure he likes at this point.
I'm sure he does. I just, you know me, I just look at candles and I go, that kind of moved down thanks to Terra. SBF hasn't managed to beat. So I think So I'm giving the year to Do Kwon on this one. It's a tough competition for asshole of the year, but I think he may have got it.
Yeah, there's plenty out there across the crypto sphere and across the real world too. In a sense, I almost wish Time would do something like that, like asshole of the year instead of person of the year. Because they do put assholes on there sometimes, just because they're the, I guess, most prevalently mentioned in the media that year. So it's not an endorsement. It's just a tag.
I don't know. I think I heard it's Do Kwon hiding in Serbia or something. I don't know. You never know with the internet what's true or what's not true. But he's definitely been a lot quieter. Although it was funny, I don't know if you saw it. He did appear on Up Only when SBF was in trouble, which I thought was just fucking hilarious. Like, just because there's another asshole, okay, he could actually come out safely. But anyway, there you go, man. There you go. So sorry, I'm down with a bit of flu, so badly prepared today. Worse than ever.
Well, as long as we don't have, Brad's not here to organize us all, so we'll just have to riff and just go. But a lot of times it deteriorates into that anyhow. So I think I think we'll have a lot of fun and no trouble, man. Let me see what Shizzy's saying here real quick. Would any algorithm stablecoin work, or was Do Kwon hanging by his pants off a ledge? I think I guess he's more commenting on algorithmic stablecoins. I mean, can they work?
My view is probably, I think there's really three types of stable coins. You've got kind of backed, USDC, which I think is backed and audited to be backed. You've got kind of the algo stuff, a bit like Do Kwon, which I think will always be subject to market games. I think they are breakable almost by definition. And then kind of my favorites of these things like synthetics that people are like Collider are working on, where it's backed by contract rather than, it's backed using one of these derivative contracts. Again, for me, they're actually the most proven ones, but I do think there's a difference between synthetic and algorithmic and backed. But I mean, what do we know to date? We know that the backed ones are the unbroken ones over cycles, and that's what we should be looking at when we're looking at this stuff, in my opinion. I mean, everything kind of works okay in a bull market. It's when the tide goes out, you get to see who's swimming naked. I think it was Saras who said that. And so if you look over cycles, as much as I am not in any way a fan of Tether, for reasons I'll explain, but I think that they've demonstrated a robustness. Yeah, they've depegged, a few points here. I think 10, 12 points at one stage, but it's worked. The reason I'm not a fan of Tether is not because I believe that they're not backed. It's that they, again, it's this whole mantra in this game of, don't trust, verify. And I don't think these guys do enough. And again, that's my fundamental criticism of Binance as well, is you guys are asking me to trust. And you could, you know, I don't think Binance is insolvent. I do think there'll be trouble. I don't think Tether is unbacked. But I don't need to trust them. So why would I?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised. I saw something in the news a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was days. It's all a blur. But that, you know, Tether was representing recently that they had replaced all the commercial paper with U.S. Treasuries as their backing.
Yeah.
Which
short-dated U.S. Treasuries. Yeah.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah. All right. Because I was wondering, I was thinking, you know, that's a pretty big move to cycle. What is it? $60 billion of backing into treasuries and not have a bunch of fanfare about it.
Yeah,
you know, which
I think if they were long dated, you know, that would be of a concern. I mean, ultimately, if you do think about it, you know, if you're, you know, as Shizzy says, you know, a centralized stable coin issuer, and you just do your one-to-one backing, it's a loss-making proposition for you.
Mm-hmm. It's like it's a change bank. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, you know, you do have to, you know, if it's to be a profit-making venture, obviously you've got, you know, the costs of you know, you can charge fees for entry and exit. But in reality, it's some way you have to generate some kind of yield from the money you're holding. Otherwise, why are you doing it? Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah.
At least with treasuries, I mean, it's the definition of risk-free money. As long as they're short-dated treasuries, I don't really have an issue with that. And if there's a run on the bank, it's, hey, look, you have to wait for the treasuries to get cash. It's a very different thing, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's risk-free, like you said, and also it's, I think, still the most liquid market out there. So you can move and pivot fast with the short terms.
60 billion in and out of the treasury markets isn't a blip. Yeah, I mean, it's a non-event in many ways.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas when they were doing the commercial paper, which a lot of people do, but it does subject you to a bunch of questions about each entity that issues the paper, you know, from everything from how are they going to succeed in the market? Can they pay? You know, what can take them out? It just brings in all this other risk. And now they just have one risk point, you know, which is U.S. Treasuries, which is kind of like the default risk point for almost all of finance. So I thought that was a pretty impressive move. Now, as to stables, in essence, you know, centralized or decentralized, the only thing I always liked about it was just the fact, you know, I remember in these like, you know, panic attacks basically in 2018 timeframe, let's say, you know, when you were always had to go from, you know, whatever you were trading in back, you know, into BTC or ETH or something. And, you know, I know to someone like you that the BTC is not an issue, but to me, I was always still worried about volatility. And I'm like, you know, you're taking the winnings and then putting in something that's still volatile. And so stablecoin psychologically, you know, took that away from me. But at the same time, it was all, you know, pinned on, a lot of them were pinned on commercial paper and other things. So it wasn't really a true safety net at that point. But I think it's a positive thing, you know?
Yeah, for me, I'm not anti-stables. I think that stable coins, if the centralization issue can be addressed, and I think it can, stable coins are an invaluable tool, not just to traders, but actually in real world use to people in bad parts of the world. And I think expecting, you know, people out in these parts of the world to just accept the volatility of Bitcoin is immoral in a way. Yeah, for Bitcoiners to go, oh yeah, well they can use Bitcoin. You go, that's okay for you, buddy. You know, where your portfolio can be down 10% a day, but you know that can translate to real things like 10% less food and so on. So I'm a big proponent of stables. You know, on Shizzy's question there, I think that we can decentralize them. I think that having a central authority is a bad idea, particularly when you consider where these will have most real world impact, where the central authority, their government, is probably the problem. Yeah.
No, it's almost like, you know, to me, if I feel like there's going to be like these government-based stable coins, that'll be centralized, of course. And then that leaves an opening for interesting decentralized stables as well. To your point, also, I think we talked last week about the UN aid project. I believe they're using Stellar, but they're transiting USDC stable to, I guess, aid recipients in different countries, and it goes straight to them directly versus, to somebody who's going to dole it out. And because, when the big aid's flowing and somebody's doling it out, that's where you get a lot of the corruption in aid.
Some of the research I've seen here, I'm involved in a couple of supporting a couple of charities, and the research, for every euro, obviously in our part of the world raised, the number of cents that actually gets put to its intended purpose at the other end is remarkably low.
Mm-hmm. Very inefficient. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, inefficient is a term is a nice term. I would say very true.
Yeah, when it's more than 50, when the inefficiency is greater than 50% of the value, that's corruption at that point. Maybe more than 5%, or 10% is probably the standard, I think, when you get into agency fees around the world. So I like that, because then if you're the recipient, pick a country, it's coming right to your wallet. And then you go from there to do something, but you have custody of it then. So it kind of really impacts at the grassroots level the aid. So I like those applications. And I see how it works, because like you said, they can't take the volatility of, it being dispersed when, let's say it was BTC and BTC's at 50 grand. And then, 3 months later it's at 20, you just cut all the budgets by 60%.
And to real people as well,
right.
The great unbanked and the people who are minorities within their own countries, who are oppressed minorities, and one of the tools of oppression is banking, and it is the use of money. For us to not look at that, I mean, obviously we're all here to click buttons and make money, and that's great, and I do it every day myself. But there is something else that we should be at as well, which again is kind of certainly from my perspective is very much, it's about the separation of state and money, and we should actually be starting these in the places where it really counts, not in Columbus, Ohio, where, do you want to know, the state really isn't oppressing you, although it may feel like it. No, there's one of the things I wish more Americans that feel left out or feel like it's not working for them could have on the ground experience in a lot of these other countries where people just have it so much worse. Because I think stuff, it's easy if you're, say looking at social all day and all you see are like, Kardashian types running around, all blinged up, or sports stars, to feel like you're missing something. If that's, what you tend to do all day, looking at that stuff, and it can put you in a rut. But the reality is that, that type of level is so few and far between. And if people could just compare their situations to others throughout the world, they might realize they got a little bit better than they thought. I've spent some time in the bad parts of the world, and I was in the most memorable was I was in the Sudan, I think in the late 90s. And if you want to realize how oppressive somewhere can be, you should come visit somewhere like that and kind of realize that anybody listening to this stream is almost certainly living in a better place than most people on the planet. And we shouldn't forget that, Jan. And that doesn't mean that our own governments are perfect or that we shouldn't oppose their bullshit. But again, I come back to it, for me, decentralized stables the provision of decentralized stables to the vast majority of the world is a more important mission than the fight over Bitcoin is better than everything else.
No, absolutely. Just because if you migrate somewhere to work and you're sending money back, they're just getting, gashed every single time on massive fees to say wire money back. or use, I don't know what those Middle East networks, I think it's Hawala networks,
Yeah.
the money lending. I don't know what the fees are on that, but I suspect it's somewhat higher too, you know. And to bypass all those networks where someone that migrates to a country to earn wages and send money back to their family, it's just orders of magnitude greater return when they can move it in the cheapest possible way and then not get.
Or banking uses a political tool to say, we don't like your tribe, therefore we're freezing your assets. I mean, this
Right.
kind of stuff, this kind of stuff does happen. And if we can just, look past our own kind of stuff, we are an opportunity. And again, hopefully, we're beginning to see the starts of this stuff. And again, for us traders and people who don't want, who want to secure our privacy, it's also good. But the point is, we're not, we're kind of the lucky one. If you're sitting on an exchange, clicking buttons, trying to earn a few sats, you're doing okay in your life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was, Niblets brought up about Beanstalk. Now, I know Brad is an expert on Beanstalk, and a lot of the listeners are, but I'm I think Eamon does a lot with Beanstalk. Have you looked at Beanstalk at all, Sean? Because I don't know enough to really comment.
I had a quick look at it. I'm going to kind of throw my hands up here and say none of these things are of any interest to me whatsoever. And again, I'll go back to my fundamentalism on this stuff is that I would be interested in the process of how it works rather than anything else, which I do think I looked at, and I did reckon at the time could be broken. Because if you look at what happened with Terra and UST, it's just a trader game to break it. And once there's enough money there, and there was enough money in UST to break it, there was enough ROI to break it, it just gets broken.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure when I looked at Beanstalk, it's one of these things, if these kind of, in my opinion, if these kind of algorithmic stable coins are successful enough, that's actually the point where they're almost guaranteed to be broken, because there's a return in breaking them.
Right. Yeah. I think what was interesting a little bit, I think what Niblets is getting at, the credit backing somehow setting, I guess, a value, which might be interesting. I wish someone would do a basket of all these methods from caliber type, perp based stuff to, the Fraxi big algorithmic pieces to say Beanstalk, and somehow get it to where there's 3 or 4, almost like the credit is creating one price oracle and the perps are creating another price oracle and something else is creating another one. And then somehow use that to set the price on a stable, along with a couple other.
And SPF FTX actually did that, so I'm not sure that would be acceptable in the market anymore.
Thank you. Hey, I got this great new trading strategy I learned about.
Yeah, no, FTX had what they called USD, which was actually a basket of all stables.
All of that. Okay. So the space is evolving, and it's going to sort out in a certain way. It has advantages. It prefers a long game of alleviating, let's just say third world poverty or, economic disparities across first and second and third world. I mean, it smooths the playing field out, and it kind of reduces the local corruption, which is a thing that I sort of think a lot about in the U.S. sometime when, everybody's always complaining about the feds. To me, it's really the local gentry class that keeps, that really has their boot on the neck, so to speak. And you can't escape those because you're born into them and you're interwoven into it by family or history. And that's here. So go to, pick a more tribal based country, society. And that, like you said, that stuff is everywhere and they can't escape it. So yeah, I like that. Niblets said, in Latin America, many people are afraid to even take over-the-counter flu meds because they can't trust the meds. Even at our worst, we are very fortunate. Yeah, I mean, that was something I saw in China, too. You go into now this is, again, 12 years ago or so, 13 years ago, but you would go into the factory and, they might be making, say, pesticides in it. And then some dude comes out and is hosing out the mixing vats and stuff with a garden hose. And then they're loading up compounds for a pharmaceutical product. Let me say, it's not like super scrub clean, and the equipment is reused across different things, to where the efficacy isn't that great. So, same thing goes on in South America. Same thing goes on in, a lot of countries that are trying to, that are kind of choked off by the patent system and can't get the products. They try to develop newer generic versions or, bootleg versions that are cheaper, but you just don't have the quality control. So yeah, that's another thing that, even though it's expensive and, there are problems there, we are kind of fortunate on that front too.
Yeah.
All right. So what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about the stuff that everybody really wants to hear about, which was kind of some OG proof of work mining type stuff, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, like again, I'm badly prepared, but I'll give you. So to me, like there's a lot of kind of, in my opinion, there's a lot of people who don't understand why proof of work came around and why, in the opinion of people like myself, it has never been, no better system has been proposed, and this FUD that floats around about energy is easily resolved. But I guess the first thing that you have to do is kind of say, well, what is proof of work's role in anything? And fundamentally, you can think of it this way: that all that we're doing, all that a blockchain is a ledger. That's it. It's a ledger, yeah. And it's a ledger with entries, and those entries can be changed. And those changes and entries are to be achieved by consensus. Okay, participants on the network. So if I want to transfer 1 Bitcoin to you, Joe, that's effectively just, a ledger variation. My balance in the ledger is -1 and your balance in the ledger is +1. Okay. And in the normal world, how that is achieved is by a trusted entity, this concept of trust. Yeah. So I go to my online banking and I go, look, transfer $1 to Joe there. You get the dollar, and then we're relying on this trusted intermediary to deduct the dollar from my account and to put it into your account. Okay. But fundamentally, it's all they're all just ledgers. So the purpose of proof of, and then you come down to, before blockchain and all of this, how did and I'm going to say some things that people will disagree with, as ever, but hopefully a little bit thought-provoking and going, okay, in the ledger of ownership for stuff, how did it all exist before this? And how did you deal with bad actors? Because part of having consensus is not that difficult to achieve consensus over me sending you a Bitcoin or a dollar and modifying the ledgers. Okay. But what happens if a bad actor tries to take a dollar from both of us? Okay. So all of these systems are designed by this. And then you go up to now, how did humanity deal with this? So we developed the concept of trusted bodies, as in the bank. Yeah. So again, this is the point where it's a trusted system and the bank do what they do. And obviously that works great until the bank proves to be not trustworthy or not acting in our interest. But fundamentally, I think you can say that it actually, the world up to Bitcoin operated on what I call proof of violence. Okay. By which I mean, how does Russia try to exert its ownership of the Ukraine, okay, on the ledger of maps? Well, it does it by the exercise of violence. And how does the Ukraine try to go, no, actually, this is in our ledger? It does it by the exercise of violence. And for most of us, and for most of history, that's how it's really worked. So the ownership of an asset is backed by the use or the threat of violence. Not a great system. And even today, we use what I call delegated proof of violence. So if somebody comes to steal my truck, okay, I delegate the retribution for that to the local law enforcement. And again, these are kind of difficult. These sound like kind of strange concepts to people, but ultimately, that's literally how the world works. Either proof of power, delegated proof of power, and in the Western world, consensus is really in this is really democracy. We give these people our power for a term, okay, and so on. But ultimately, we do operate in a proof of violence or delegated, most of us in a delegated proof of violence regime, and that and with central entrusted entities that when they turn bad, and they always turn bad, you just go back to 2008 financial crisis, okay, we end up paying bad. So in terms of the concept for something as stupidly simple as a ledger, which is all that a blockchain is, okay, in doing this, but because that's all a bank is, that's all kind of really, and that's all that, you know, land registries are. It just says, Joe, you own this 10 acres, Sean, you own that 6 acres, and if there's a dispute, we're going to settle it effectively with violence, delegated or otherwise. So when Satoshi started looking at this, he said, look, the fundamental point here is that if we can make this trustless, okay, we resolve an awful lot of the issues, and mostly we move away from proof of violence to something else, and moving away from proof of violence is actually quite a good thing. This is best described in a thought experiment from the early 90s called the Byzantine generals problem, okay? And the idea is very simple, is that how do you coordinate an attack on a city when the city is surrounded by 10 armies, okay? And the only way you can coordinate the attack is sending backwards and forward messages, but you know some of the generals are traitors. So this is the fundamental logical problem that the Bitcoin set about to resolve, which is to say, how do you do this strange thing? And, you know, to add into the thought experiment, unless all the armies attack at the same time, they lose. Okay, so, you know, when we talk about where does proof of work come from, or Nakamoto consensus, it actually comes from the point of view of solving this thing they call the Byzantine generals problem, or the two generals problem. But basically, how do you reach valid consensus when some of the members of the communication channel are traitors or untrusted? How do you achieve trust? And proof of work wasn't an invention of Satoshi or Bitcoiners. Proof of work was an idea originally floated in the early 90s to deal with spam email, believe it or believe it not, where it said, look, if I have to do some work, my computer has to do some work to send you an email. Okay, there's a cost of a small amount of electricity. That's fine. But that guy sending, or girl sending out 10 million emails, all of a sudden it destroys the economics of it. Okay, so that's where the original idea of proof of work from. So like a lot of things in Bitcoin and subsequent chains, an awful lot of this thought process was worked out. But to understand what it is, in order to become part of the Bitcoin network as a miner, you must expend work. You must do work. Technically, what the work involves is taking the transactions that are waiting to be done, okay, and reordering the blockchain, proving it's valid, and moving on. But in addition to that, what you must do is, people go, it's complex, it's solutions to complex mathematical problems, have never read what proof of work is. Proof of work is guessing a number. Literally that simple. Guessing a very big number. So all of these Bitcoin miners, all that they're constantly doing is trying to guess a number. Now, what they actually do is they take the messages in the next block, they they guess a nonce, they run it, they hash it and see how many zeros are on at the other end. But taking out all of that technical gobbledygook, it's just constantly guessing numbers. Okay. And in doing that, so anybody who wants to be a miner on the Bitcoin blockchain must expend an incredible amount of energy guessing numbers in order to be able to produce a block. Okay, that block must then be validated by 51% or more of the other miners on the network. And the theory behind this is quite simple, is that there is no economic incentive for anybody, okay, to produce a bad block. And even if they did produce a bad block, that bad block would not be accepted by the network. And they would have to get to the 51% attack. And that's almost an impossible objective to achieve. Okay. So this is a way of creating a trustless a trustless way of updating the ledger.
Okay? Yeah. So, quick question. So let's go back to the 10 generals. Okay. Yep. So when in Bitcoin and we say mine a block or the 51% approves it, then the whole all 100% of the chain goes with it. Basically, it brings everybody forward.
No. People who do, what would be called a fork, okay,
right?
So in proof of work, and one of its major advantages of a proof of stake is the longest chain is always the right chain. So let's say, you take the great example, the island of Ireland has, 1,000 miners on it, okay, and we lose the internet for 3 days, okay. The miners are still running. We've effectively created our own Bitcoin chain, because we're not in sync. We'll just be agreeing with each other, yeah? Okay, but as soon as the internet is turned back on, we'll all revert to the longest chain, which won't be our chain. So you can get these side branches and side chains, but the fundamental principle in any proof of work chain is the longest chain is the valid chain. There's loads of really good reasons for that. And you can get non-malicious reasons. For example, the example I gave, where the chain can split, but as soon as that reason is taken away, then everybody reverts back to the main chain. You can get malicious reasons, and the point is they're then just stranded in their own chain. They're gone. They're cut away. They're off in an island of nothingness.
So when in the original Byzantine fault tolerance, I think, right, that analysis. So when the 10 generals are around there, and I guess there's some traders in there or bad actors, but you want everybody to attack at once. So
the first bit of it is the cryptography. They know. So let's say that, because it's actually called the 2 generals problems. Historically, it doesn't work with 2 generals when you look at blockchains. So I'm using 10 arbitrarily. So the one of the generals says, look, we're going to attack on Tuesday, sends out the message. The city being attacked intercepts the message and goes Wednesday to one general, Thursday to the other, and basically sets up. So the messages can't be trusted. But when you introduce proof of work, so much energy is expended, so much work is done to encrypt the message and to validate the messages from this general. We still don't know if this general is good or bad, but a lot of work is done, that when the city intercept it, they may be able to do it for one, the bad actor one, but they can't do it for all 10.
Right.
Yeah. So
they can do it for one.
You create a messaging system. And remember, all that the messaging is doing is saying, well, it does 2 things. It adds new coins to the blockchain, the so-called block rewards, the miners' rewards, and it reorders the ledger, saying there's been a change of 1 Bitcoin here to 1 Bitcoin there, and so on. That's all a blockchain is. Yeah, I mean, what people have some strange ideas of what it is. for example, to go, well, I keep my Bitcoin in cold storage. You don't. Your Bitcoin is always on chain. All that you're keeping in cold storage are your private keys that allow you to use that Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is always there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a ledger. So all that your keys are giving you is access to modify that ledger entry, or to propose a modification to that leverage, to that ledger entry.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people have a hard, a lot of normies have a hard time understanding that it's always there,
Yes,
and everything you're protecting is the
your Bitcoin.
yeah.
I don't have, if I have a mobile wallet, my Bitcoin isn't sitting on my mobile, it's sitting on the blockchain. It's a ledger entry on the blockchain, and all that any of the wallets are doing is giving me the right to modify that ledger entry. That's it. That's simple. Nothing else. Now, I'm a big proponent of cold wallets and so on, but it's also important to understand that the Bitcoins are never off chain. It's not possible for them to be off chain. And when people talk about wrapped Bitcoins and so on, what they mean is that Bitcoin is locked at an address belonging to somebody else. Okay. And that is leveraged off to another chain. Bitcoin has never left, never will leave, and never can leave the blockchain.
Yeah. No, I mean it's such a brilliant concept in so many ways. That I mean, you're right that anytime something's centralized, then the entity is doing the managing of that process. Their loyalty is to the organization that's centralizing it, not to the customers or the clients. So that's why it's important, when we keep doing the sort of 2020 analysis of, FTX, let's say, that's what just surprises me so much about the institutional guys and different people that, you would think would understand that, but yet they just fell in head over heels over, what looked like an anointed play to them. And, like you said, then pledge it all to that platform, so to speak, or lock it in that platform. And yet people.
And the key thing there is that they all require trust.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this thing that was created 13 years ago is trustless and permissionless. And we can go on about proof of work versus proof of stake versus, sharding and all of this, but fundamentally, we're just going, look, it's a trustless, permissionless system. I don't need your permission to use it, Joe. Okay. And I don't have to trust you. I don't have to trust you with respect to a transaction. And that's a solution to a massive problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, because one thing, as I always talk about is in finance, you can't trust anybody because everybody's motivated by getting more money. So, you have to trust yourself. And if you can eliminate that from various points in the process, that makes it easier for you to feel safe or feel protected. I mean, one of the things I've also been kind of noticing is that, most of the people who, let's say under 30 crowd, or right around 30, they've never really been, I mean, sure, they were 8 or 9 or 10, I guess, around 2001 timeframe, but they really haven't lived through environments where banks pay any interest on money.
No.
Where, it was always you got 5 or 6% at the bank on cash that just sat there, that was insured, that, no matter what, I mean, the governments just print more money. It's like they backstop it 1-to-1 forever, because if they don't, then it questions the whole implied value of it.
What I love about this generation, and I think Bitcoin has played a huge part in, even though they're beginning to go through their first real economically hard times, I don't think 2008 was actually that bad, is something I never did, is they question what money is. I'd never questioned what money is in my life until Bitcoin, ever. Money was just money. It was just, there you go. You're going to pay me 100 grand to do something. It's 100 grand. I never question it. And I love that. And why I kind of say that regardless of what happens to Bitcoin and crypto in general, in my mind, we've already won. That we've managed to get a whole generation of people to question what money is, because I know my parents didn't, and I know I didn't.
Yeah.
I
No,
think
and
that's
this,
an incredibly cool thing.
yeah, no, you're right. In this country, I think, there was all, we had the, I think it was like it would have been like my grandparents, I guess, or my parents' parents, they were Depression era kids, or
Yeah.
they grew up in the Depression, and then, and they felt it, and they knew the value of a dollar, and it
Yeah.
was, here in the U.S., and they were so frugal, that generation, didn't spend, but everybody knew what a dollar was worth, no matter what,
Yeah.
because it had always been bailed out. So, it was never in question. But now, maybe you thought about gold a little bit, but, it was still kind of in dollars or other things. But at the end of the day, nobody really thought about, wait, what exactly is this? And why is it worth this?
Yeah.
Not is it worth this? Why is it worth this? And I think that Bitcoin has helped educate that whole generation of under 30s into, what is the difference between fiat and crypto? What is the
I mean,
problems with centralization?
it's one of
Hmm?
these, I feel so dumb now looking back, going, and it wasn't like I wasn't argumentative when I was young. I was. But yes, I kind of feel dumb going, why didn't I ever ask the question of what money is? How come the thought process hadn't, how come I'd never even thought of that? Yeah.
I think nobody wants, I don't think people want people thinking about it, because at the end of the day, it's a psychological construct.
Yep.
There's not, in the US, there's not, I don't know what M1 or M2 is right now, but I would suspect it's got to be in the 20 trillion range or something, 15 trillion, 10. There's
It's a big
not 10
number, yeah.
trillion. Yeah, there's not 10 trillion in gold sitting in Fort Knox. I mean, I
No,
think that's
mean,
all the gold in the world.
we
Yeah.
don't, and also, we are entering, in my opinion, into an exercise in modern monetary theory. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, it's not that fiat money is dumb in any way, or the people who are I'll come to that, Robertus. That it's not that fiat money is done, is that there are, people view economic principles, or Bitcoiners do, or crypto people do, as Keynesian, which is what we're looking at, as being the kind of the world, and Austrian, which is very much the Bitcoin kind of standard. But we do have this thing called MMT, in modern monetary theory, and basically its proposition is that the most important thing is actually the velocity of money. Yeah. How much it turns, not the absolute quantity. And that again, I think that's an unproven model, and it's also, but what it is it's a model that punishes people who save. Okay,
right?
Because if the value of your dollar, is better off buying a truck and selling it next year, then that's what you need to do to retain your wealth. So we do have this, we're kind of, I think, almost inadvertently, or we've been, moved into this position of being in MMT. And I think this is an incredibly, personally, dangerous and unproven thing, and punishes the people who normally in society, the people who save, the people who want to go off and buy their own house and not have it owned by the bank, and all of these things that were just, in my mind, normal. It's actually punishing them, because you shouldn't be saving your dollars or your fiat. You should just be, as soon as it's in, get it out. And I do think that CBDCs will strongly discourage the holding or saving of money, and will strongly encourage the use of that money, this MMT money, to stimulate the economy by punishing you holding it and rewarding you for spending it. And that, again, for me, slightly a dystopian world. Sorry, man. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it's funny. Earlier this morning, I don't know, there's an economist from IIF that I follow a lot, or I retweet a lot, Robin Brooks. And he just put out, like, an hour ago, a tombstone, MMT 2013 to 2022, rest in peace. So he's declaring it dead too, which was kind of
I bloody hope so.
yeah. No, I mean, I was surprised that, though I didn't really, I got sort of lost in the whole austerity versus stimulus arguments of '09 and then going forward from there. And it seems to me MMT was just saying you can generate in a low interest environment, you can just generate as much debt as you want. It doesn't matter.
As long as the money moves.
Yeah. Whereas we know it does matter. It's like eventually somebody's pulling some chairs and everybody's scrambling. But yeah, that was funny. I tagged you in a comment there so you could see it later on when you're done.
I'll have a look if I survive this flu, man.
Yeah.
Roberta's asked the question. So one of the big criticisms that people have about any of these, proof of stake, proof of work, and it's always something to be aware of, is centralization, because in the event that somebody controls enough of the network, then we're back to a trusted system, which is that's exactly what we were trying to escape from,
right.
Which is, one group of people go, you can move that, you can't move it, so there's a couple of things. First of all, I'd say that most of the time when people try to present data with respect to centralization, they produce mining pool charts. And mining pool charts say, 31% of all mining is controlled by slush pool or one of these pools. And in order to understand why that's not an issue, you have to understand what a mining pool is. So if you think of it like this, that there's there's a certain amount of hash rate on the network, which is the number guessing.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a trillion people, there's a trillion attempts to guess a number every second or whatever. Okay. You will have a probabilistic, almost guaranteed, you will guess and if you're 1% of that, you can say, look, every 100 blocks on average, I'm going to win the block reward, which is why I'm expending the energy to do this anyway. Okay. And the smaller your percentage is, the longer you have to wait. So what mining pools are simply where a group of miners come together and say, look, we can even out this payment by making the following agreement. Okay, we've 20% of the hash that's controlled by individual miners, which means that we know we're going to win 20% of the block rewards on average. Okay, and we'll divvy up that 20%. We'll divvy up every block reward equal, across the hash that we can control. So it evens out payments. Okay. Now, a miner can, and as an ex-miner, I'm doing a little bit of mining now at the moment as well. If a mining pool fucks around, it's a matter of about 2 seconds for me to move to a new mining pool. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Their purpose is literally to even out payments in this thing, which is ultimately the amount of Bitcoin that you're going to get is a function of the percentage of the hash rate on the network. So there's 100 units of hash on the network, and I'm contributing 1 hash unit. Then every 100 blocks on average, I'm going to earn this. But I could also go 1,000 blocks because of this. But if 20 of us pull together, then my income is a lot more stable and a lot more predictable. That's all that is. So, and again, that's all that a mining pool is. It's just a way to deal with the variation in rewards. Okay, that over an extended period of time will always even out, but by clubbing together and having a bigger enough hash, we can pretty much go, every block I will get X, and that's why it works that way. Yeah,
you're kind of diversifying or sharing the risk across a pool, and everybody's trying to guess those numbers. Yeah,
not the risk. You're evening the probabilities.
There you go. Yeah,
you will end up actually getting exactly, minus the pools charge a little fee, exactly the same amount of Bitcoin over an extended period of time, but you just won't get it in lumps. You'll get it spread out evenly.
Yeah.
And again, there's no loyalty to these things. Trust me, you hop from one to the other. In fact, any smart miner will literally be jumping around these based on a variety of factors. And so there isn't this. So the first bit where people argue centralization, they bring up mining pools, is just a complete misunderstanding of what mining is, why mining pools do this, and the fact that if a mining pool acted badly, there'd be no miners on it in about 3 seconds.
Everybody would just leave. Yeah. Okay.
So the other argument for centralization is more interesting, which is you can have a situation where you have something, and China was a great example of this, where the requirements to profitably mine were access to cheap computational power and cheap electricity. If you have that and a few skills, you can be a successful miner. Okay, so countries can have advantages, and China, up to a few years ago, had an advantage in that remote parts where you could buy electricity basically for free, and also you had access to, massive amounts of cheap relative to the Western world electronics. So you did have an economic advantage. That doesn't imply that all those miners are working together. In fact, it doesn't. You still have competition. Yeah, I still want to mine more Bitcoin in my mine than yours. So what we can say is that we can see elements of geographical centralization, but not control centralization, because that's just historical fact. We know that from China, and it's a competitive business. Everybody's chasing the next block to get the next 600K or whatever the number is. Yeah. The other thing that is really cool about proof of work versus proof of stake is that you're not limited in terms of your contribution to the network by anything. Okay. What do I mean by that? In proof of stake, if I own 20, the maximum I can stake is 100% of the network. Yeah. That's
right.
Yeah. Whereas in proof of work, the maximum I can stake is the net sum of all the computational power on the planet. It's produced by something outside of, so it's electricity and computational power produced by something outside of the actual network itself.
That's true. I hadn't thought of it that way. So yeah.
So it's not like this limited resource. People can go, ASICs can be limited. I go, sure, ASICs can be limited, but building an ASIC or an FPGA is not that complicated. But the access to the network is not defined by something intrinsic to the network. The access to the network is defined simply by the availability of energy and computational power, both of which are an effectively unlimited resource.
That is, look, I never really thought of it like that. I mean, I get the diversification across mining pools competing with each other, but I hadn't really thought that you're right, that it is just limited, or it's unlimited based upon the cheap power or computational, whereas everybody else is fixed. Yep. No matter what. You could have all the computational power in the world, but you can't do anything with it. Yep. Whereas here, it actually does create something. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, perspective. I, again, just hadn't thought of it that way. Quick question on China. Remember when all the miners were in China? What was that, 2 years ago now, maybe? And then I think in Beijing, there were a lot of the component manufacturers were there, and then some of the other groups. I want to say, what was it, Bitmain or Bitmain or something like that?
Yeah,
and
some of the ASIC providers, yeah.
Yeah, and then they had a big rival, and I can't remember the name of that one, but they were always duking it out. And if you just got to look at the end story of that, I'm sure it's in the media. But just the fights between those two founders, I mean, it was just private security forces coming in and taking over buildings and stuff, and just fights. I mean, so they were not working together at all.
I mean,
again, and just
you either believe in capitalism or you don't. Yeah, and you say, look, if there is an opportunity to produce Bitcoin mining equipment, okay, which is, it's not simple, but they're just ASICs, yeah?
Right.
some of the cheapest, dumbest chips that you can make, okay, then if there's a commercial opportunity to do that in Ireland, somebody in Ireland will do it, and if it's profitable.
Right.
And so, again, I think there's a lot of people have not thought through, and mostly just haven't looked at the evidence of history to say that this stuff it's so subtle that it looks easy to throw rocks at. Again, like the simple thing, the mining point. You go, yeah, but like you kind of have to dig into the details of that. And again, ultimately, what I love about it, which makes it fundamentally different than proof of stake, is this access to the network is unlimited. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's free. It's only limited by, so you don't need anything special to do. You don't need anything intrinsic to the system to be part of the system. You just need computational power and energy, which again is effectively unlimited.
So how does it? Look, what I'm thinking about now is, okay, instead of one Bitcoin, break it down to sats or into something lower, as things go. So it sounds like, maybe someday it's got at the latter stages of mining or whenever that is, it becomes about maybe mining sats instead of coins.
In about 100 years, yeah.
Yeah, and then you're going to need all that power, that unlimited power and computational, capability. Right.
Another thing that's commonly misunderstood, and again, I wouldn't say by anybody listening in here, but just to state it. So, a miner who produces the next valid block gets two rewards. He gets the block reward, i.e., he gets some fresh Bitcoin, okay, which is halving every 4 years, and he gets the transaction fees. Okay, so a lot of people go to me, well, when the last sat is mined, the network's fucked. I'm going, no, again, the theory here is very simple, that over time, the transaction fees, okay, become the main revenue of the miner. So there will always be a miner because there's always fees.
Validating transactions. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Exactly, yeah. So, and in fact, if you look at it over time, you can see the percentage-wise, the transaction fees slowly growing, yes? In terms of the total payment to a miner, the transaction fees are increasing. So again, one of these myths about proof of work is when, I think it's 2150, when the last bit of Bitcoin is mined, that's it, the network's fucked, they'll have to issue more Bitcoin. Again, it's not true. It's pretty well thought through that the miners will get that. The other aspect of it, which again always entertains me, and if you go back to 2018, it was the perfect example, which was, people were going, the 6K number can't break because miners will be mining at a loss. Okay, and that was the ultimate kind of, it cost $5,900 back then to mine a Bitcoin, so the miners can never let it go below 6K. And again, this is just completely misunderstanding how mining works. Every 10 minutes, a certain amount of value is released to miners, okay? And that the adjustment to price is actually dealt with over any reasonable time by an adjustment to hash power. So if that block reward every 10 minutes comes down to being $2,000, okay, then ultimately the way capitalism works is that the amount of hash power donated chasing that $2,000 is going to come to $1,900. So there is no price of Bitcoin at which mining doesn't work. Because what happens, people will go, it's not profitable to mine. They turn off their machines and it becomes profitable to mine.
For the people who stayed. Yeah, got it.
Which again, for the more efficient. Yeah. So again, like if there's 1,000 cheese sandwich shops in Dublin and the price of cheese sandwiches drops 50%, well, the inefficient half are just going to close down their cheese sandwich shops. It's exactly the same in mining. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. Yeah. So it never could go below it. All right.
No, it can for a period of time. Well, we're seeing that now. While you're seeing some of the kind of leverage miners get flushed out, and you go, yeah, well, this is good. I mean, these guys leave it up to the tits, thinking Bitcoin was always going to be above 50K. They're wrong. Yeah. and now they go out of business. C'est la vie. And it's the other argument, by the way, against big miner centralization. The guys who are failing are the big fucking miners. It's not.
Yeah, because they can't adjust their. Yeah, because like you said, the smaller ones can just shut off the rigs, whereas the bigger ones have to keep running no matter what because they have investors. You know, they have debt to service. They probably expanded too fast, as is commonly done in all business. They can't pivot like that. Yeah, I was going to ask you next. I know we're already over an hour. It went so fast, but
sorry, man. Sorry about that.
No. I love it. This is what this is fun. What do you hear? Like, when China shut it down and all those charter jets were bringing all the rigs to the U.S. To Utah, Texas, Florida, places like that, wherever you could get cheap energy inputs. I mean, what are you hearing about, because I haven't really stayed on top of it, but all those mining groups and pools, I mean, I did hear about the big ones, getting in trouble. But, I mean, what's the perspective in the BTC community about that? Is it same problems as in China, or is there something else that, that people don't see that you do?
Well, I think if you look at, if I got the question right, John, if I didn't, please interrupt me. So,
sure, sorry.
If you look at the big publicly quoted miners, so these are the kind of behemoths that got set up after the China shutdown and during the last bull run. What they became is just a proxy for Bitcoin. Okay, so it allowed institutional investors to take a Bitcoin position without touching Bitcoin. And it's a ticker on NASDAQ. Yeah. So I set up, Sean's Texas mining operation. I IPO it. You give me the money. I guarantee you I'm not going to sell the Bitcoin. So on the balance sheet is all the Bitcoin. Okay. You guys throw money at my ticker will pretty much track the price of Bitcoin. Okay.
Right.
Unfortunately, because I'm relying on a funded only model, once that income stream starts to dry out, I have to sell my Bitcoin. And that's happening at the worst possible time because everybody is saying at 60,000, you can't sell. You're a proxy for the Bitcoin price that we can trade on the NASDAQ. Okay. And at 20,000, I'm already bankrupt. Yeah. So we do have all of these different kind of financial models that are coming in. There's some really, there's a lot of criticism, sorry, Joe, you have about 5 more minutes just to kind of get into some of the other criticisms of mining. I want to make one comment on proof of stake at the end of it, but cut me off at that time, dude. One of the biggest criticisms of Bitcoin mining is energy usage. It uses more energy than Norway or Switzerland or New Zealand or, wherever. Yeah. And there's one simple truth about it. Yeah. Mining Bitcoin is just running a cheese sandwich factory. Yeah. Okay. Input costs, revenue. Yeah. And your biggest input cost is electricity. So you are always motivated to move to the lowest cost of energy. And if that lowest cost of energy is the most polluting motherfucking energy source in the world, the worst coal plant in the world, you're going to use that energy. Okay. However, the cheapest energy in the world is stranded energy. So there will always be miners who are going to go off, and it's a free planet still, I believe, who are going to go off and use coal plants and so on. But actually, the cheapest energy in the world is stranded energy. Yeah, it's that excess from the wind turbine, farm, where it's producing all this energy at 3 o'clock in the morning that it can't sell and produces it anyway. Yeah, it's lost stranded energy. Okay, Bitcoin mining is a buyer of last resort of this. It makes these types of projects more economically viable. So the people putting money into these kind of, remote energy, remote green energy generators need something like Bitcoin because it guarantees them income. Yeah, there will always be a place to sell the energy. So again, a lot of FUD, certainly a lot of miners who are just running a business and don't care how the and neither should they. It's a free market. If the local coal plant is selling electricity to charge your Tesla, why not use it to power my S19? Yeah. If you've got a problem with that, deal with the local coal plant, not with the Tesla driver or the S19 user. But in behind it, what people are really not prepared to accept is that its ability to use remote and stranded energy makes it incredibly supportive of environmentally friendly projects, because it gives them a buyer of last resort that they don't have. For example, the grid in Ireland, yeah, when it's too windy, you know, at 4 o'clock in the morning off the West Coast, all the wind turbine guys have nobody to sell their electricity to. They have nowhere to store. It's too expensive to store. So they are quite happy to sell that excess, that bit they can't stick on the grid, that bit that they literally can do nothing with. They're quite happy, and it makes their wind turbine plants and the next one and the next one more economically viable. And so this is why this whole kind of FUD around energy usage is actually missing the point. It's a buyer of last resort. I'm working with, I will give them a working with is a big word, but I'm working on a project with an Irish mining company called Skilling Mining, who are doing anaerobic digestion. So to give you a small example, and what they do is they take animal waste, okay, and to produce methane. That methane is then put into a turbine to methane that would otherwise have been released into the environment to produce Bitcoin. Okay, the output of the AD process is fertilizer and Bitcoin.
Okay. I love it, man.
So you know, ticking so many boxes, whereas previously a dairy farm or anywhere producing animal waste was paying to have this stuff taken away, and ultimately it's going to rot somewhere and it's going to produce methane. So there's an awful lot of rubbish spoken around Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining that is, I think, due to ignorance or knowing it or not understanding the subtleties. It's an amazingly elegant solution to I'm going to say it again, to proof of violence. The fundamental challenges I have with proof of stake, by the way, because I know I always go at proof of stake. Number one, you can't bootstrap a proof of stake project. Okay, so when you talk about fair launch of a coin back in the old days, it meant everybody could turn on their computer and mine it. Yeah, since the resources to mine it are outside of the chain, you could start with 0 coins and everybody had the opportunity to do that. Okay, you cannot do that with proof of stake. You can't start with 0 coins and stake them. You must start.
That's true.
You must start with insiders. So
yeah, you have to buy the tokens.
Which means somebody has to bootstrap the project, which means they're getting the inside deal, and because they're getting the inside deal, they get the largest share or the biggest share that they want. And then the process of staking means that they're also getting the largest reward ever. It's not a fair system. There you go, man.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, thanks, James. That's cool. Appreciate that. You know, it's funny, you're right, because whenever they do those comparisons, they're always like, you know, more than some country, like you're just, you know, strapped, like it's an either or, you know. And when you brought up the wind turbines and the, you know, animal waste product or the biological, you know, product there, you know, it's sort of like the methane flare stuff in Texas where they're powering off of those emissions. Stuff that wouldn't, you know, methane is a very polluting gas.
Worse than CO2. It's the worst greenhouse gas
than
CO2. Yep.
So anything taking that off the board in any capacity at all is a net positive to me, and it overshadows or outweighs, you know, the electrical sort of consumption that they're tracking. And again, it's not coming from the other electricity. It's coming from power that would just dissipate and never potential energy. It's not kinetic. It's what's the other word?
Mining is the only thing that I'm aware of that that can genuinely support remote power production, because it doesn't need, it's not, again, I go back to my cheese sandwich factory. Yeah. Okay. I can't move my cheese sandwich factory to Iceland to use geothermal power because I've got to transport the cheese sandwiches somewhere. It doesn't work. Yeah. Bitcoin just goes on the ledger at the source of energy. Okay. So Bitcoin, the cheapest energy in the world is stranded energy. Okay. Or unused energy. And hence Bitcoin will always migrate towards, because it's an economic incentive to do that. And in doing that, it economically incentivizes these projects. And, you know, one of the great stats, because since people always throw, you know, you use more power than Switzerland. Okay, yeah, but we use less power, okay, than Christmas tree lights when turned on every year.
Yeah.
Bah humbug, yeah.
Yeah, atheist, right? Yeah, no, it is so much fun, and you know, it's usually when you see stuff like that, somebody's paying for that campaign to do it. You see it in the U.S. There was a big thing with you know, the sugar industry, as well as say corn syrup industry, and everybody that goes against, say, the, you know, who finances the camp. I'm not saying corn syrup's good, but the ones who are financing the media campaign against corn syrup is the Refined Sugar Association. You know, like white sugar, basically. You know, the not the raw sugar, but you know, the people that process it, an industry. So, you know, I would suspect this one must be coming from, you know, some traditional finance types, or somebody that's trying to cleave the environmental audience away from crypto. And I'll tell you, they did a pretty good job last year.
They did,
yeah.
And it's governmental as well, because, you know, in the EU, we're talking about banning cryptos that use proof of work. Yeah.
Yeah. For the environmental concern, not the financial concern. That's the intriguing thing, you know. It's like a subterfuge.
That's the message, yes. That's the message, yeah. And again, the conspiracy theorist in me goes, yeah, of course, because they can control proof of stake.
Right.
So Robert, easy to capture.
Robertus asked the question, is there any, I think he's looking for a proportion between miners just using, you know, plug into the wall stuff, and miners using, you know, the capturing the waste energy that's not being captured.
I don't think it's actually even possible to tell, to be honest.
Okay.
I think that, you know, Saylor has set up the Bitcoin Mining Council of North America, but the point is, you know, you can be a miner and nobody knows you're a miner. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you know, you can be quite a large miner and nobody know. I mean, the only way my last mining plant was found was because the cops were flying around with thermal cameras looking for grass growing houses, and our warehouse was like glowing because of the amount of heat we produced.
They thought you had a weed farm going. That's funny.
That and the fact we called the business the Hash Ranch didn't help.
Yeah. All you need is like some Bob Marley music playing, and you know.
But like our hash power would have appeared in some Chinese mining pool, and it was in West Dublin.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
Let's go through a couple of, I know you're not feeling well, so but we had a couple of comments back here. I'll just scroll through them quick and we can comment. You know, Niblitz was talking about, you know, gold is basically the OG proof of work token. You can't fudge the work, but damn, it's a wasteful process.
You see, I'd argue about, I don't, what's wasteful about it?
Maybe the mining?
You know, the gold mining, but proof of work, it's just using energy. Yeah.
Oh, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
that's
again, you know, thermodynamics and all that. It's just converting energy from one type to the other. So, you know, energy is neither created or restored or destroyed.
Yeah, and then also it's you know, to me, nobody's making the comparison of how much power does it take to operate the fiat-based system? How much does it take to print paper? You know, how much does that cost?
I really think it's the wrong line of reasoning. Okay, because the actual point of reasoning here is actually, this is actually good for grid stabilization okay, which most countries have a problem with, and for the promotion of green energies, because it makes them more profitable, which means it's more likely for capital to flow into them.
Yeah.
So we should be using 10 times more energy, and we'd have a far stabler grid and a far greener grid. That's my answer to it. Is not this comparison is again, in my opinion, makes no sense to make the comparison.
Yeah. Well, what I like particularly about it, I hadn't really thought about it that much, but when you're adding another revenue stream to your green energy generating operation by adding the mining, and as you pointed out earlier, not only do you diversify against the cost of energy when you're putting it back to the grid or selling it back, but you're also generating other assets that are portable that have tremendous amount of value.
Mostly you're selling energy you could never sell.
Yeah.
So if you look what happened in Texas recently, that the excess energy of these plants, because again, people need to understand how the grid works. The grid is always producing too much energy, because it doesn't have storage. So power production is being bought on and offline all the time to be able to meet, that I remember when I lived in Texas, at 7 o'clock every Sunday evening, we get a power cut. And the reason being that there was a massive spike in energy to turn the ACs on in the offices for the next day, all turned on at 7 o'clock in the evening. Yeah. So there are, and so lots of power plants are not producing 100% at the time, which means the return on their capital is not great. But if you can take those unutilized time periods and produce a financial asset, i.e. Bitcoin, or sell that electricity, all of a sudden those assets are far more productive.
Absolutely. I mean, the cash flow's up, the valuation's up. So yeah, that's a no-brainer. I saw something recently, or months ago, about a power company in Argentina doing something about mining, but I would think that the bigger utilities would get on this eventually, just as another, like we said, another way to finance things, generate, because one, as you pointed out, no storage of electricity, and also the transmission issue. I don't know, you can't transmit electricity, say in the US, that's maybe produced in California and ship it to New York. It just doesn't ever get there because there's a decay in it as it transmits out.
But you can transmit the financial, the money associated with it with Bitcoin.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I'll scroll through these. Shizzy had a question about this. Looks like the oil refiners and miners in the same argument as far as with say windmill generated energy. I did read some of those guys down in Texas using that flaring unused gas to mine. So I think that's pretty much that is going on, right, Sean?
It is, yeah, at the wellhead.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. And then Shizzy also talked about Adam Back created the proof of work for the email spam problem, if he's not mistaken. I know that one of our other listeners, Chuck Schotten, I don't know if he's here today, but he and I were talking about something about social, and he said there was a meeting once. He's on all the lists of the top 40 guys that created the internet, and he said there was a discussion at the very beginning about how to rate content, and something about how to rate emails, if I'm not mistaken, but it was never implemented. I'd love to get him to comment on that in the future, just because so many people were working that and then just let it go.
You need to get him stuck on. He's one very smart guy.
Yeah, no, he's good. He's the best pitch guy tech pitch guy that I've really ever met too, as a CTO guy. He's just that good. And then Niblett said 20 years ago, he asked a group of his MBA friends what is money, and no one had an answer, of course. And then I think we got the rest. So, look, great show, Sean. Thanks for coming on. I know you're not feeling well, so I appreciate you doing it. I always like talking to you. I mean, I have a different style than Brad, obviously, but I just love to learn things. And the fact that you were there at the beginning, or very near to the beginning, means a lot to me and to all the listeners as well. So I really appreciate you doing this, and particularly, the every Thursday thing. Super cool. So
I love the show, guys. So I'm going off now to absorb a lot of hot whiskey to see can I get rid of this flu.
Hey, take a little medicine for the rheumatiz, huh? All right, buddy. I will. Yeah, I'm gonna do the end. Try to do the end that Brad does. But you rest up, and we will see you next week.
Cheers.
Thanks again, Sean. And as Brad would say, I guess I want to thank all the listeners for being here. I want to thank everybody who comes in and listens to us on the podcast circuit. It's really a treat to bring people on like Sean and learn something myself and share it with everyone else. So as Brad would say, go to wherever you do this and go smash that thumbs up button on YouTube or wherever you are, so that we get more tracking into the algorithm. But again, great show. And Brad, I hope you're having fun. We will see you tomorrow. And thanks again, Sean. And thanks to all the commenters, Shizzy, Niblets, uh, Robertus, James. Thanks, everyone. If I missed anybody, tell me tomorrow. All right, guys. Talk to you later. Have a great day and be safe. Bye-bye.